complexity, because the simpler it is, but the whole assumption of this is simple to complex. That's a myth. We still have simple and complex. The structure of the universe is simple and complex. That isn't proof of anything except interfacing. So it is an assumption. If something is simple in structure, it's what? It's old. If it's complex, it's late. Well, that's an assumption. See, that is a discussion, but that is an assumption. It can see paramecium, but I don't know that you can detect how old it is because of its simplicity. Well, naturalism, that's what Christian education. And I told you that W.R. Byrd was a Yale graduate in law, and that's why it's doubly important, because he was the chief counsel for two of the major Southern issues over evolution in textbooks. Okay. Now, the most important thing in dealing in the church. Now, if you find preachers and elders and deacons that want to address that, you're going to have to address the issue of worldview. You're going to have to address the issue that the Bible cannot be studied in a vacuum, in spite of many people insisting on it. The Bible is the Word of God to people in time, in history, in the world, and that is directed to this world. And if a Christian reading of reality cannot be sustained, then we shouldn't have that position. Because we can't consciously ask people to believe something that at least some people know to be false. Now, to understand the whole issue in biology about naturalism, that all there is nature, or this, natura, and that science exhaustively explains the behavior of nature. Therefore, nothing is allowed from outside. Nothing is allowed. Now notice, within the time-space spectrum, what would you mean by outside? See, the young Oxford student talking with his examiner about naturalism, and he was asked a question about God, and he said, what is it that God would be outside of? Supernaturalism? What is God outside of? If God created the time-space structure of the universe, if he is not immanent within that, and therefore a limited God, what is he outside of? Where is he? Why, he isn't anywhere. See, God isn't anywhere except as he chooses. See, we're not pantheists. God's every place, and he is everything. See, creation says we can't be pantheists, polytheists. Think all the things the Bible just starts right off that we can't be if we believe that. And each one of those positions have a position regarding how God's related to nature, and how God's related to history, and how God's related to society. If God is just immanent within, like Hegel's Geist or an evolutionary drive, see, Elan Vital, if God is that, well, then he's limited. He's not the God that started the universe. And what does it mean to start the universe? Well, that raised the problem of limitation of language. Where is God? He is nowhere, because to locate God, except voluntarily, would be affirming that he's limited. Where is he? Now, you can talk about the mansions and sing those southern songs about mansion over the hilltop. Please don't sing them to me, but you see, these are highly symbolic human statements about God. See, I don't talk about going to God because God's present. Ray, your thesis? Ray finished a marvelous thesis about the Lord's table. Ray was raised Roman Catholic. And the presence, well, we already have a biblical model of presence, but we're not pantheists, we're not polytheists. Think of all the things we cannot be over the biblical. But most people have no idea what belonging to church means. They just mean bringing the kid, hosing them down, and giving them 2 spoonfuls of Cheerios and sending them to school to climb a wall for an hour in Sunday school. And but I'm not going to read any more of this paper, but I want you to think about naturalism being the heart of the issue. How is God related, biblically first and then scientifically? How is he related to nature? And I mean that physical nature. How is he related to history? How is he related to society? Then how is he related to an individual in these structures? See, to talk about conversion, or to talk about sin, or to talk about cross-cultural communication, how is God related to the world he creates, and nature has a history? See, that's not the same thing as saying evolution, but if nature has a history, that's why we have eschatology. We have an absolute origin and absolute consummation. Now that's not evolution, it's not theistic evolution, because that's not the same thing. But if reality has a history, then there's process. Is that too complex, this lady? Now, if there's history, there's process. Start here and go there. Well, what does that mean? See, the Greeks and the Semitic people have no origin statement, and they have no consummation statement. It's just infinite development. But development doesn't mean anything except descriptively, without a goal. I don't know whether anything's developing or not until you could specify some goal attainment. And then that would make sense. So look, all the things we preach, and I don't hear preachers connecting what the Bible says about the kingdom and about the coming of Jesus to what's going on in the world. It must be completely disassociated from everything else that everybody learns in media and the kids learn in school. Then wonder why, if we are, we're losing an audience. What audience? We're losing most of the people, even the people that come to church regularly. Well, how'd you lose them? Well, not consciously, because they didn't consciously decide to be in opposition, but subliminally they're imbibing on assumptions that can't make peace with the Bible. And Christian education that doesn't bring unconscious to level of awareness is less than Christian education. Christian education is a strike for awareness. Are you aware? Christian education cannot be unconscious or subconscious. It must be very conscious, because Christian faith is intentional, which means I decide. See, that's why decision is imperative, not just for messages on faith, but decision is imperative to get something consciously before the mind to decide. You believe that? What's the consequences of that belief? And what difference does it make whether atoms are made in space, or what difference does it? Say, well, none to me. My wife just left me yesterday, and you're talking about time and space. See, there's no solution as long as you're focusing on the wrong thing. There's no resolution to the human cry without the God that they won't think about, because he's irrelevant to their brokenness. While the God that we're talking about is the only possible resolution of brokenness. So a preoccupation on self rather than on God removes God from the solution. And that's regularly done. If it were irregularly done, that would be one thing. But it is regularly done in the churches. Well, I didn't say intentionally. Did I say that? See, if all the error and all the evil was intentional, it would be less than it actually is. Well, I'll have a copy of this naturalistic critique in the library, not for this class, but I will have next year. And it's a very important criticism of naturalism. And I would encourage you to strike right at the heart of fundamental assumptions. We'll have a little break, and then I want to return and direct attention to 5 faces of atheism. Here's the consequences. In the 19th century, after these developments, we just started turning into the 20th century with our little notes. In the 19th century, the social sciences, each one of the social sciences came into existence in avowed atheism, like astronomy and physics came into existence in avowed theism. What had happened between Galileo and Newton in the 19th century is the progressive removal of the ground for believing in God. But then we have this left, naturalistic humanism. Well, in the 60s, everybody, well, if you and I didn't write a book on it, we're the only people in the United States didn't write a book on humanism. Everybody, but see, it had been present in the culture for 150 years. Why all the concern about it in the 1960s and 70s? Why, just caught up with them. Caught up with who? Well, the people didn't have any idea where this came from. We'll have a little break, 2 or 3 minutes. Read our friends here. Borrow money from them. Promise that you'll pay them back. And they may come to school. Talk them into coming to school. We need 10,000. I said 1,000. We actually need 10. I've got to be honest with you before you go. So when we return, I want to talk about the development. Now, we have a whole class on this, but I'll just, tonight, kind of a sermon. If I had the money, I would rent a tent and have Rick sing, and Brad would bring in dancing bears, and then I'd preach on the 5 faces of atheism. Yeah. Thank you. We've got to entertain them. Much better. All right. So they're not critiquing the whole development of creation. Because they're not critiquing the foundation No, just because people have there are a number of these. This is the first man. This is right here. This man see, she's in a is the first man with the tool. See, there are people. The people that we see that the biology man, the process. Just go work out the whole issue. Well, I'm just going to go and grab you. I appreciate it. Most people do it in this department. Don't believe that. Experimental. Well, that's what I meant to say, but I said clean out. It didn't matter. Well, he'll have to deal with these things that develop the problem. I don't know if he's dealt with that. Well, that may be anything that Mr. Lee makes an example. That's not an answer. Yeah, no, he does. I know, but this man right here is the only man that's a believer that's got the tool. See, we've got to have tools. We don't have the money. We're trying to get people one by us, get the right folks, and God put people in these places to share this information so we can transmit. But until we transform this education, we can't even get before the kids what to watch for. And we don't want to produce neurotics so they won't like to teach us. We've got to respond. And I don't mean that more complicated to say, hey, I think the answer, but not the way that people that I can't answer. Yeah, she's got married. Particular issues are in the class, the Christian faith and the social sciences. That'll be the fall semester, and biological theories will be the spring semester if you have any interest in those things. I can't say that, but I don't, I could intercept that, but I don't set the schedule. I could even have them at night. I could tell them, could come. I could have them Tuesday night. But I don't set the schedule, see. I got yours, but I don't set it. But a very important article, Michael Bruce is one of the major persons in the philosophy of biology. I use his book in philosophy of biology class, and I'll just leave it here for you to look at. he has a brilliant essay on Darwin's debt to philosophy, and Darwin assimilated a philosophy of science that came way well. One of the 19th century specialists in philosophy of science. There's no question that in Darwin's library and in Darwin's journals, who he read. See, that's how you tell influence. And this article that I will be binding with about 100 pages of material in the Christian faith and biological theories, or a copy of that. But he is a major person, not a Christian, but he's a major person critiquing assumptions in biological theories. And this particular paper, and I have 40, 50 page papers on running Kuhn's paradigm through biological theories, and another 40 or so page paper on running Kuhn's paradigm through the physical sciences that you probably haven't seen. They're bound. And these are crucial for a Christian world perspective. And one can't protect evangelism unless one can protect the entire interpretive schema of the biblical material. One can't lose God and the fall and a few things like that and still maintain the importance of the church. I mean, not without brain damage. Well, I don't want you spending all this time. You could Xerox that article, but for these, I'm not authorized to have these Xeroxed. So that's what the problem is with these. He said that I could have them and people could read them. And this is very important. He is a major person in the philosophy of biology. And as with all the sciences, biologists do other things other than just biology. Doing philosophy of biology, and economists do more than economics. Physiologists just describe, so they don't have to have any theoretical input. They just have to have operational visibility. Now, the 5 faces of atheism, by the time we get method intact in all the disciplines, astronomy, physics, chemistry, geology, biology, social sciences, here's what we have to examine. And an excellent book that you make, Husserl, Edmund Husserl. He's father of phenomenology, but he did his doctoral thesis in mathematics. But he has a book in paperback, Northwestern University Press, Crisis in European Science. Now the thesis of that book, now notice evolution, here, evolution, assumption. If evolution was the case, and there's more knowledge available in the 19th century than ever before in the sciences, how could you explain the most intensive social, political, personal crisis in the history of the world? See, by 1848, you had revolutions in every country in Europe. The breakdowns in social structure. How is God related to nature? How is God related to history? How is God related to society? How is God related to the individual and society? But every individual in every culture, see, is hooked to these. There's no such thing as a radical, autonomous individual. That's out of the question. That's why worldviews and presuppositions, see, are fundamental. You do theories of history, you do theories of nature, you do theories of society, and Hegel and Marx are the historic origins of social theory. And what's the essence of that? Prior to the 19th century here, in the West, Christian worldview dominated that God created man. Man revolted, he fell, I'll just put the fall, and sin explains the disorder. personal disorder and social disorder. Well, then if sin is the cause of all disorder, personal and social, then salvation ought to reorder it. See, these four categories in the book of Genesis, if you've even devotionally read the book of Genesis, sin disordered God and man's relationship, man and himself, man and others, the social perimeter, and man and nature. Now, there's no question exegetically and theologically that that's what sin did in the book of Genesis. So that's not just a theoretical, theological discussion for Sunday. It's completely disjointed from everything else in the world. God and man, but see, from the 19th century forward, Western man, now Eastern man has never accepted God in a Judeo-Christian sense. See, so the East has never lost God. They've never had him. The West has lost him. Man in himself, this is psychology. I personally think we should teach social psychology. See, as long as we teach individualistic psychology, it gets more and more people thinking that people are isolated atoms. And no such thing exists. See, the Greek word idiotes, to be general if possible, an idiot is an isolated person. Is an isolated, disjointed, can't function in society. Okay? So, man and self, think of all disorder. Where's the church? That almost everybody's whole in it. Man and others, these are the social perimeters, and this is the physical perimeter. The Bible says that sin did this, and salvation's to reorder this. So the church, whose Christian education position can't speak to these things, will not address the issue of disorder. The Bible has direction. We're just jumping through the Bible every 18 months and will not reorder it. In fact, it is a procedural, it follows disorder. So disorder has very infrequently ordered much of anything. Now think about it. But the Bible says, how is God related? He's the Creator. How is God related to history? He's Lord of history. Well, it looks like man runs history, doesn't it? You don't make decisions and have meetings and things, cause wars and things. It looks like man's under everything. Now then, every ethnic group has a social structure. And social structures have institutions. Now, we're on the way to looking at those things. And the naturalistic theory of social institutions was vested interest exists prior, and then vested interest is the source of creating institutions. Naturalistic theory of institutional origin maintains that man creates institutions to protect vested interests. Now, when people get power in the name of God, they don't say, well, I've known all along I shouldn't have this power, and I'm giving it to everybody. Show me, give me an example of so many to one. See, when people have power, they don't want to divide it up. And that's political theory. See, it's over-ordered. But there's no revealed political theory. See, it's just between anarchy and totalitarianism. I doubt that God's a praying Republican or praying Democrat. Both of those are myths. Now, vested interest means value. And value means presupposition. It means protecting something. See, but naturalism can never explain where the vested interest came from. But see, selfishness can. See, the biblical theology of man, the Imago Dei seminar, which we can touch on someday, sin removed man's center from God and placed it in self. See, our whole socio-political, economic, governmental system is ordered. The welfare state is ordered on the basis of creating need, and the politicians agreeing to tax people to solve that need. You see, it is a position that creates need. There's no time that there's not more need. So the vested interest will march. Whoever's the loudest will get the grease. Now, you see, it is a position that is dialectically can't stop. See, politicians come and go on the basis of how they meet whose needs. The loudest groups, the vested interest groups. Is this true or false? Well, what is it that orders all the divergent vested interest groups? Nothing. That's where pluralism comes from. See, it's not resolvable because the very methodology is not resolvable. See, once you methodologically take on a destructive method of moving things, you can only move it so long. Now, you can control it politically if you've got the army. But then who's going to control the army? Where's the army going to get ballistic missiles to, drop in everyone's underwear? Well, they're going to have to get it to someone who's got enough brains to make it. That's all. Because most neither have the technology nor the competence, but they have the cash to buy it. Okay. Now let's take a look at the 5 faces. Now, here's the question. In the West, Christian West. Now the West has been Christian. The East has never been Christian institution. Okay, that, if there were self-evident propositions, that would be one. How do we move from Christian theism? God who created the world, created man, man sinned. That's why God can't be God and responsible for evil. And we don't have an eternal dualism like in Hinduism, pantheism, animism. See, the conflict is not unresolvable. The only religion in the world that affirms that the conflict has been overcome is the gospel. All other worldviews of all other non-Christian religions maintain that the conflict is perennial, unresolvable. See, we're always placating the forces, the demons, but that'll go on. There's no stopping. See, there's no stopping them. It just goes on. Well, that should create despair. But most people do not pay any attention to the consequences of their own position. See, they want their position to be the most reasonable, because who would say they're unreasonable? But to be reasonable means you must be aware of the consequences of your own position. One of the things that being reasonable means, you may hold a viewpoint A, B, C, D, but you see the consequences of that. If you refuse to follow the consequences, then you're unreasonable. What's the consequences of these things? Now let's just take a look historically. Now the physical sciences had their origins avowedly in a Christian context. The social sciences had their origin historically in an avowed atheistic context. But it was the physical sciences and the consequences of these moves, see, that progressively removed. And not only, but after when these men attacked the classical arguments for belief in God, then belief in God had no rational support. Well, today in the churches, most people's faith has no rational support. Now, Blumont would say anybody asks for evidence is an unbeliever, but that's for a different reason. That's because it's Heideggerian existentialism, not because he's crazy. But when a person says, well, faith means that you're not asking for a reason, that legitimates every faith in the world. See, that's like mysticism. See, it's its own destruction. It certainly can't support the claims of the Bible. Consequences of that. Now, the social sciences, here's the question. Just like the origin of the physical sciences in a Christian context. No, it wasn't among the Greeks, nor the Arabs, nor the Chinese. No. Technology, yes, but not science. In the explanatory system. No one had this explanatory system in the history of the world. But the social sciences have their origin in the time of crisis. I'm just going to put these dates. The French Revolution. Now we're deep. See, our heritage, if you've had that little shotgun history class about it, you understand our heritage as to this hour failed. Not only every person, but institution has failed to address the most powerful shaping force in the world, and that's science. And you know I don't mean, again, that nobody has. But that's a different thing than saying it's institutionally, collectively has dealt with that. In its thought, in its preaching, in its teaching. Okay? Now, 1789. Right here. Think of that. French Revolution. Now, all these people were Christian. France was Christian. Up to this particular period in history, that was the most diabolical brute behavior in the history of the world. When the French rebels began decapitating what is now just out the Louvre, human blood was ankle deep, decapitating all those who didn't agree with the revolution. And only Edmund Burke critiqued the revolution. The Romantics, Southey, Wordsworth, those that know literature, said, "'Tis bliss to be alive. It looked like this revolution is going to create a new world." We've heard that before, recently, past. Well, as a matter of fact, it didn't create a new world, as a matter of fact. But these sciences come into existence because the social anomic behavior, always put crisis, E for multiple crisis. Now, crisis in society appears when the institutions that stabilize society begin to crush. See, if the church's in trouble, that's because the units that make up the church is in trouble. The church doesn't get in trouble, the family units are paradisical. Everybody's perfect at home, but it's a mess in church. That does not occur at all. And crisis. Now, that's an English word. Greek word means judgment. So we can use everything's a crisis. See, but crisis means judgment. Judgment means something is crumbling. You have the need for social and personal stability. Now notice, biblically, for best possible human development, stability is imperative. Most people, you and I know, can barely advance in stable circumstances, let alone disorder. Huh? Is that preachy? But that would stand up under technical data. Stability. Now we need that personality-wise. And when you start getting rapid social change, I'll leave that as a code. Rapid social change. That means the institutions that have held the society together cannot hold the society together anymore. What were they? Here? Whether this. The church controlled lives from the womb to the tomb. Well, but what was happening in society? You didn't have to be an atheist to see that it couldn't order the society. It was coming apart. And it was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Voltaire and Rousseau that set forth the first fully worked out naturalistic theory of human institutions and of human nature. Now notice this coming. See, it's everywhere in the culture and in the textbooks and in the universe. What is? Voltaire and Rousseau, because they were popularizers. You see, they were not creative minds, but they were brilliant articulators. More in advance than Elmer Gantry, who never had anything to say, but he said it sonorously. They were brilliant. Very few preachers have anything to say. So let them be funny, because that's the only thing that counts. Even if you can't remember the jokes. Laughing is better than crying. That's a value judgment of that. Now, Voltaire and Rousseau said that it is environment that creates man's negative environment. Now notice, it looked rather harmless, but the contract social, the social contract, is the first naturalistic theory of the origin of disorder. Personal disorder and social disorder. In the history of the West, Christian West, well, very few high school students ought to have already assimilated the arguments of Voltaire and Rousseau. And if not, why not? But disorder. By the time we get to the 20th century, all the social sciences maintain that it's our environment. See, we have two things in the 20th century. People are controlled genetically and environmentally. See? It's like the nonsense from Harvard's Gould, see, about sociobiology. It's neither socio nor biology, but if you're at Harvard and you have a PhD, you can say almost anything. And you can lecture to people, and whether it's true or not, you can go on and say it. So, genetics and environment. These are the people that said, oh no, the Christian reading that man's problem is over sin and God. Therefore, if it is, then the way to rectify the negative factors in human being is a religious matter. And it's in the hands of the priest. But whose hands is it going to be in? You already know. It's going to be in the hands of the social sciences. It's not going to be in the hands of the priest long. Oh, it will be for some conservatives, but you see, that's another matter entirely. You're losing a paradigm. See, we lost the paradigm in astronomy and physics and chemistry and geology. Notice what we lost. We first lost creation. Then we lost the Creator. Then we lost the biblical doctrine of the origin of man. Then we lost biological and social sciences. We lost the Imago Dei and what the Bible calls sin talk or disorder talk. Completely displaced with naturalistic theories of scientific explanation of why people behave the way they do. So psychology would explain individual behavior, and abnormal psych would discuss abnormal, but see, abnormal and normal is only statistical remarks. And if there are no absolute category, moral category, I don't even know why they have abnormal psych. All it is just, this is a different behavior pattern than that. But to say this is bad or this is acceptable, oh, they say it's antisocial, well, that's a value. Why should you want to protect society? Because if evolution is the case, it'll just wipe one thing out and just get another. But, you know, they're not consistent with those things. You know, naturalistic theory of the origins of what we call evil. Evil. Now, evil is not the same thing as sin, because tornadoes and floods and famine are not results of human decision. See, wars are. But some evil, some negative, a man that broke down and cried before his captors, he set fire, see, at a social club in New York because his girlfriend, see, wasn't going to take him back. He's up for murder now. Well, probably he'll be up for psychiatric examination, and he's not accountable for murdering. Why? Because he can't help that. But see, 97 people are just as dead as if he could. You see, the courts, the social system, social analysts, we have to ingress. See, and law was finished as soon as you brought psychoanalysis into law. Because there's no longer law. It said, well, this person is not responsible. That may be the case. I have no doubt that some people are not responsible. I don't have any problem with understanding that. But that doesn't keep the law from being the law. Now, if you want to be merciful, you might need God to legitimate mercy in the law system. See, if you want to be gentle, that's another thing. But don't say, well, we don't really want laws anyway, because society can't stand without them. No society has ever stood without them. And when society gets pluralistic, it's a crisis. It's not an advancement. Now, here are some things to think about, so we just go home, and I'll come to this a little bit again. Number one, to put these down just for thought, because we have classes where these things are examined, and I can just sermonically just assert them. What is the relationship between the development of science and the classical proofs for God? We do talk a little bit about those in apologetics class. We'll have second semester, but why apologetics does not win very many people. Science and proofs for God. Now, it's all over these little moves. Causality, proof talk, theory of physics talk, structure. See, if the universe is a machine, that hardly leaves room for freedom. Kant understood this. See all these things go? Freedom, some kind of freedom, is essential for this kind of claim. Well, but there's some freedom here. See, if you get a biological theory and you get a psychological theory that can explain all human behavior, there's hardly any room for Well, then if there's none of this, don't praise or blame anybody for any kind of behavior. See, all of our language talk and said we shouldn't do that. That's all nonsense. See, half of our talk is nonsense on certain models of the universe. See, if you can't help doing what we're doing, if we can't, then there isn't any point scolding a child for setting grandmother on fire the second time. Once at breakfast and once at dinner. Said you shouldn't do it. See, because no naturalist could ever locate a should. No one's ever seen a should. Now, at least eternal natural law could talk a little bit about should, but you might need God to talk about a should. Naturalism only knows what is. See, when Kohlberg, before he killed himself, the head of the education department at Harvard, had brought us situational ethics into educational theory with Piaget in American education, he shifted from ethics to values, because even the mafia has values. See, the drug lords have values. They're just different than ours. But see, if there's no ultimate grounding for values, then the only way to resolve confrontation between conflicts and values is power, or how many Uzis you have. See, there is no way to say, this is wrong. You should not do that. Stop that. Because all decisions in politics and economics and on the street in the real world are power brokerings. Power brokerings. Whether it's wars, nations, how many tanks are Russians going to have in Lithuania? How many would you need to whip both people in the Lithuanian army? 6 trucks and a bicycle. You got to be kidding. See, that'd be like going down to first grade and shaking your fist in the kid's eye, just kind of threaten that boy or girl down there, so you beat them within an inch of their lives. Now, what's this have to do? Well, worldviews, world machine. Where does that leave man? You get a reading about man, and you get a reading about this. Then political and social and economic theories are all about control. See, no society in the world assumes that everybody can do as he pleases. No society in the world assumes that. But in our society, if you're mature enough, you can do as you please. You know, these are for mature audiences. Well, then we're playing language games, you see, because what is a mature audience? Well, whoever wants to see this or do this. That's what you mean by it. But we've had nominalists before. All empiricists are nominalists because empiricists deal with particular things, not with universal or general things. No one ever sees a universal or a general remark at all. You can't have ethics without generalization capacity. You can't have other things either, but social sciences. Now, the social sciences came in a context when science seemed to give the lie to the classical, now classical I mean in scholastic, Thomas Aquinas' utilization of Aristotle's 5 ways. Now, Aristotle's 5 ways were not proofs for God's existence, because Aristotle's God was not a person. He was not a creator person. But he was a principle of rationality in the universe. But Aquinas knew that if he's going to use Aristotle's method, cross-cultural use, using tools, be careful about the consequences of philosophical tools. The church will one day use Kant, and they'll use Hegel, and then they'll use Heidegger, and they'll use other death wishes on themselves. But in this context, science seemed to give the lie to God, creation, man. Now we're getting closer. We didn't have any social sciences. Why? Because society was under the auspices of, that's not false, the church. So the priest handled all anomic behavior in children. But after this crisis, it became empirically the case that the church couldn't manage it. Couldn't manage what? Because empire. But by the time we get to Aquinas and high scholasticism, there was an identification with culture and church. So when the culture went completely, see, that's what happens in science. The church, Catholic Church, had identified so inseparably with Aristotle that it couldn't free itself from Aristotle. But instead of saying we're using Aristotle till we get a better interpretive schema. See, it's a hermeneutical use of a non-Christian system of thought. See, to interpret the world as a Christian. Well, even immersing Aristotle can't fix him up, see. He can't cleanse him long enough and keep him clean enough to use him. Nor Heidegger, nor Hegel.